So the final major impact that we're going to talk about in this unit is overpopulation. So essentially, us taking up almost every inch of possible space that is available for us. So we are still working with middle school standard 3-4, and we are focusing in on being able to identify the reasoning for population growth. So why has it expanded at such a rate that it is? And then also explain how population growth is affecting our natural resources. So make sure you for sure have these out in front of you, and we will get. So human population occurs if the number of people in a group, and when we're talking about group, we're talking about like an amount of people within a specific plot of land, exceed the carrying capacity of the region occupied by the group. So what that means is that you have more people in an area than what the area can actually hold, meaning that there may not be enough resources, there may not be enough space, things like that. Now, what brings on overpopulation? Well, an increase in birth rate. Obviously, in order to overpopulate, you have to populate, which means that people have to be born. A decline in mortality, meaning that there are less people passing away than there are births occurring. An increase in immigration. Obviously, no one new specifically needs to be born, but moving from one location to another. Immigration isn't necessarily from country to country, but rather just from one location to another. And then finally, an unsustainable biome and depletion of resources. As soon as one area is depleted of resources, then people need to move to the next area that has the resources in order to support them. And sometimes that means taking over areas in which others have already occupied. So that's overpopulation kind of in a nutshell. When we are working independently, remember your champs, and basically for you to be able to show me that you are good and you know what's going on, your success, you need to have your notes completed and your exit slip completed and turned in. Awesome. If you're sticking around for whole group or for a small group, then let's keep going. So what increases human population, like overpopulation? Well, essentially with advancement of science, technology advances, which allow us to prolong human lifespan. Basically medicines, vitamins, surgeries, things like that, that would normally kill us back prior to these technologies are able to now allow it to sustain and even increase. Pressure on global resources, so ecological disruption as resources deplete, and then moving to the resources. So again, if we have an area that's resources have been completely used up, we are going to, as any instinctual animal would, move to a location in which you can find the resources necessary to maintain life. And then also agricultural advancements, which really takes that strain off of the global resources, because with agricultural advancements such as tools and industry and things like that, we're able to grow crops to maintain our necessary food intake. We're able to harvest them at a much quicker rate in order to get it to the table at a much quicker rate. We're able to add chemicals and pesticides and fertilizers to allow them to grow and not be depleted out by other animals looking for the same resources. So that would go under tool making and agricultural revolution. Industrial revolution is just being able to plant certain crops in certain regions of our country and then be able to truck them to where they need that same resource. So if it weren't for the trucking industry, a good portion of the South wouldn't have the corn and wheat that we produce, and vice versa with, say, any sort of citrus fruit and things like that. So these are the three that really kind of force overpopulation or allow overpopulation to actually occur. So community supports, or I should say lack of supports, leading to overpopulation. Poverty. It is just a data-driven result that those whom tend to fall below our poverty line, tend to reproduce and have more children than those above the poverty line. And this usually then coupled with higher death rates, because if you're not able to afford proper health care or proper foods, you are then forcing unhealthy choices and possible diseases that do cause death at a much younger age than typical. Other community supports, families are being provided with further supports to ensure that poverty is the last option. There are plenty of governmental support systems like the food stamp programs and getting free and appropriate education for all. Again, statistical facts show that living in a higher socioeconomic status pairs with you being able to see the doctor more often, with you eating a better diet, which then allows you to live longer. Also, it then provides like making it less necessary to have more children with the fear of death. Like, I know I only need one child to be able to quote unquote like survive and carry on my name and because I know that I can afford the proper health care to keep him healthy along with myself. So I don't need to have multiple children knowing that maybe one or two of them might die. Like, it's a sad thought, but those are the thoughts that happen. Immigration adds to overpopulation of certain areas. So moving to more developed countries from less developed countries, they were once known as like first world versus third world sort of countries. But basically, those countries with money, such as Europe, Canada, America, places like that, tend to have more resources for those because we have more money as a whole. Giving a rise to a shortage of resources. So because we can afford to pay other countries to bring their resources over, we then can support our population far greater. But this then leads to the overcrowding of major cities, where in New York, you're paying a ridiculous amount of money for like a hallway of an apartment, things like that. So immigration then adds on to the overpopulation concerns. The depletion of resources. So essentially, the Earth is only able to produce in a limited amount of water, food, things like that, in which we need to maintain life. So if we go through and we are completely tearing down forests, if we are hunting wildlife in a reckless manner to where their population is being depleted, we're polluting what little natural resources we do have and can't necessarily afford to manage the cleanliness of it and things like that. All of this then brings on acts of violence and aggression toward each other, to where we have the issues of not being kind, and then it forces people to want to leave but aren't necessarily able to leave, things like that. So depletion of resources can bring on so many more domino effects other than just obviously not being able to sustain life as well. Degradation of the environment. We obviously, as we've talked, we we have overused our coal, oil, and natural gases, any of our fossil fuels, to where we are concerned that we will no longer have fossil fuels to be able to actually maintain the standard of living in which we are currently at. But then all of this then leads into global warming, melting of the polar ice caps, so we have increased flooding, changes in climates and patterns to where we get freak 4-foot snowstorms in the middle of April. And then obviously the rise in sea levels because of the excess water flooding out coastal regions to where we may not even have specific cities down the road. So that then just adds to less land means more people on the smaller amounts of land, so more overpopulation. And then finally, conflict and wars. Because we are constantly fighting for what we believe we are owed, or what we are able to produce or mine or whatever, in more developing countries, so those who can't necessarily afford to pay our price tag, it puts a lot of strain on what resources they do have. And then what should be helping like develop their countries is now being rationed out or even monopolized to where we then cause conflicts. There has been conflicts over water, conflicts over oil. We're currently in a slight conflict over oil. And that's all that's kind of happening. As we start fighting and becoming within close proximity of one another, we are also then starting to cause more disease. Yes, things like coronavirus and Ebola and things like that start in an animal host, but once we start putting a lot of people around those animals, there is what's called overflow, which is what allows those animal-borne diseases to now be transmitted to humans, where then we can mutate it and it is more easily transmissible from human to human. So by forcing people within a very small area, now we are just causing that many more health concerns. And then finally, just starvation. When resources can't get to where they need to because of conflict and war, those are the issues that are happening in Ukraine, where people are rationed out how much bread, how much eggs, how much milk, and things like that that they're able to take because they need to make sure that they can feed the people who didn't necessarily choose the war, and things like that. So resources become such a desperate need, but there are so many people you have to try to care for that you just can't. This is a video all about how population growth has honestly impacted our planet, both positively and negatively. So take a peek at this. There are a couple questions that go along with it. If it's not going to work in this PowerPoint, then I will make sure that I get the link put into Schoology. Thanks, guys.